Today we're doing beef and mushroom Tex Mex salad, and so I've got some ground beef here that I'm going to get started heating up. Now you're going to put this on medium heat, and it's only about ½ a pound of ground beef. You could use other types of meat if you choose to, but this is actually going to serve 4 people. So starting with that smaller amount of meat, we're going to be able to stretch it because we're going to use the mushrooms to go in there with it. So go ahead and start that cooking, break it up a little bit as it goes, and while that's cooking also I'm going to add a teaspoon of each of 3 different herbs to it, herbs and spices. I've got a teaspoon of cumin, a teaspoon of chili powder, which of course is a blend of many things, and a teaspoon of dried oregano. And putting them in early is going to allow them to toast a little bit and develop some flavor as of their own and extend the flavor as this goes. Now this is a really quick dish to make. It takes probably around 20 minutes, which for me at least is quick. You can do this part of it ahead of time so that when you come home at the end of the day, the actual cooking part is already done. You just need to reheat this a little bit. So I'm going to let that go ahead. We're just going to let that brown. And when it gets brown, we're going to add some other ingredients to it. So don't feel, and it's going to continue to cook, so don't feel that you have to cook it up until 160 degrees or until it's lost all pinkness, because that's going to go ahead and continue to happen as we go. What I'm working on now is the mushrooms. Now mushrooms are going to take the place of about half the meat in this, so I've got about 4 ounces of mushrooms. You can do this kind of thing with most recipes and substitute up to half, 50% of the mushrooms for 50% of the meat, and it works fairly well. Because I'm using ground meat here, I'm going to try and chop it up so that the pieces are similar to what you'd see in ground beef. Now if you have people that don't like to know that you're extending the beef a little bit further, then you may want to cut the meat or the mushrooms a lot finer. I like to know that they're there. I think the visual cue to me is important. But the value of having the mushroom here is simply the fact that we get something called the 5th taste or umami from the mushrooms because they're very high in glutamic acid or glutamate, and that extends it or makes the dish more savory. It makes it more inviting bite by bite as you go. You get the same kind of chemical in monosodium glutamate, the chemical that they used to use a lot in Chinese food. So we're just going to go ahead and continue to break that up. I think that's broken up enough. I'm going to go ahead and add the mushrooms to it and let them cook along with this. And again, we're just going to keep cooking until the meat no longer has quite as much redness to it or pinkness. And break those bits up as we go. All right, I'm going to add 1 cup of stewed tomatoes, including their liquid. Now, it's not important that you chop the tomatoes up ahead of time. And if you were doubling this recipe, by the way, I would stick with just 1 can, which isn't going to be quite 2 cups, but you could add a little bit of water to it. Go ahead and kind of chop these up after you get them in the pan, as you're stirring around. This is going to go ahead and cook for about 10 minutes. If it gets a little bit dry, add a little bit more liquid to it. You can just use water at that point, unless you have some more of the stewed tomatoes, and then you can use some of that juice. While the meat and mushrooms finish cooking, we can go ahead and make the dressing. For this, I've got 2 tablespoons of ranch-style dressing. You can use a light or a fat-free if you choose. Sometimes I find that the lighter versions or the reduced-calorie versions don't have the texture and the mouthfeel that I like, but this would be an opportunity for you to use them because there are going to be other ingredients in there as well. So I'm also going to add half of a fresh tomato that's been chopped. Somewhere between 1/4 to 1/2 of a cup of chopped fresh cucumber, and 1½ to 2 teaspoons of chopped cilantro. And those are going to get stirred together. And that becomes our dressing in a little bit, so that can be set aside. Now as we actually construct the salad, I'm going to do 1 serving at a time. This actually, as I said earlier, makes 4 servings. So this is going to be about 1 cup of romaine or other fairly firm Lettuce, iceberg, you could use also. It's not going to give you quite the bright color and quite the same amount of nutrition, but it would also work. And then we're going to top that with about 1/4 of the meat mixture that we've put together here. This really smells good. And then on top of that, about 1/4 of the dressing that we just made. And you can kind of scatter that across the top. And that way people can fix their own as the time comes. And stir it together. And then I'm going to put a little bit more tomato on here. This is the other half of that original tomato. We're just putting it there to make sure we've got a lot of color. I've got 1/2 cup of cheese, so we're going to put about 2 tablespoons of reduced fat cheese on here. And if you like that to get a little bit more melted, you could put that directly on top of the meat as opposed to when I applied it this time. And then a teaspoon or so, I've got 2 tablespoons of chopped green onions, so we're just going to sprinkle some of that across the top. I've got the white and the green part of it there. If you like one part better than the other, feel free. You could also use a sweet onion in that case. And then there's corn chips, as there are with many Tex-Mex salads. Now this is the amount of corn chips for the entire recipe. So it calls for 2 ounces of corn chips or tortilla chips. So we're going to put on the amount that would be for your salad, which is about that. So I think this is one of the places where on some of these recipes, the calories and the fat content start to run away from people because the tortilla chips, even though these are a baked version, still have a fairly high fat content. So I hope you'll try this one. It's really tasty, it's a lot of fun, and it's not very much time to put together, and I think your family's going to like it if they like Tex-Mex food at all. It's beef and mushroom Tex-Mex salad for Oklahoma Gardening. I'm Barbara Brown.